Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. As I promised, today is going to be a detailed analysis, and we're specifically going to be looking at the Kherson front line, and we're going to look in depth on what are the challenges and what steps Ukraine need to take to make sure that Kherson succeeds. This is done because at first I was very skeptical and I was explaining what are the major problems for Ukraine to cross. After I was presented with some of the resolutions to these problems, I said that we should look out for this direction, that there are possibilities for some developments. And some people took it a little bit too far, such as, oh, Ukraine is now gonna make some kind of big push and completely liberate Kherson region and dominate Russia. That is not the case. So today we're gonna take that and other questions in details, and we're gonna look at it right now. To set a baseline, let's understand where we are right now. Most notably, Ukraine has two confirmed holds on the left bank of Dnipro River. One hold, it used to be two, now it's one because they're connected, is this one over here. This is where the bases of both the road bridge that was over the Dnieper there and Antonovsky, and second one is where the railway bridge was across Dnipro. These two bridges, while right now not functional, sometime later, especially when we get further into advances, can easily become arteries for Ukraine to deliver goods. First and foremost, because if railways are enabled, that's going to be massive. But secondly, because the road infrastructure that is located right along these bridges would allow for a further development and delivery of goods. And then the second outpost that we know of is around the village of Krynki, where Ukrainians are controlling the village. And there are right now rumors that they are trying to push in basically all directions, both towards the south and towards the east, to expand that bridgehead. Beyond that, there has been complete reports that areas around Poima, Pidstepne, and Pishanivka, they are now being also contested regularly, but right now there are no visual confirmations that Ukrainians are indeed controlling these areas. These are really nice places, and up to this point we can confirm that there is approximately 500 men or women of Ukrainian troops that are located on the left bank of Dnipro on constant basis, and they are trying to get more people there. Next, we need to step away from how I'm usually reporting on things, because often I just simplify and I say that these troops moved there, these troops moved over here, just to kind of keep the common picture. But if we want to look in details, we need to understand that militaries are not just sending men and seeing what sticks and what works, but rather they are defining certain objectives, and then these objectives one by one start being executed and then moving towards some kind of potentially bigger objectives. This is how militaries work, and this is something we always need to keep in mind. So to start off, we need to very clearly understand what is Ukrainian objective. First objective, we already know, and Ukraine has achieved. They secured certain bridgeheads to land on, and this is already happening in this area, so this can give you a little bit better perspective of what Ukraine is trying to do if we look at specifically at the village of Krynki. So around Krynki, as I said, Ukraine is controlling a little bit of a bridgehead over here, and they're pushing both south and they're pushing also east. Why are they pushing east? Well, because if you look very closely enough, then over here there is a first major road. This major road goes right alongside Dnipro. So one of the first major objectives for Ukraine when they're thinking of expanding this bridgehead is to try to move along the river and take care of these roads. If they will able to take care of these roads even more and maybe establish that longer connection to their initial bridgehead to the in the more western area, then Ukraine will have some kind of connection. Secondly, improvement of this is if Ukraine will be able to reach this highway over here, which is a major development because right now Russians are using this highway to deliver supplies to their forces, to make sure that their forces are able to move very fast alongside river, and that their forces are able to react to other potential bridgeheads. If Ukraine is able to cut this road, this will prevent certain mobility and time of response for the Russian forces, and it will prevent certain supplies to be delivered as fast as Russia would want it, because they would have to take some other forces. This is the initial goal, and this is where Ukraine right now is aiming to go. To reach out the set goals, Ukraine needs to make sure that they overcome certain challenges that are being posed by Russians. We can categorize these challenges into about 7 categories, and the first category is the enemy troops and what to do with them. Second category is the enemy armor and how to deal with the enemy armor. Third category is the enemy artillery and what to do with the enemy artillery. Fourth category is the enemy's small air targets or drones. Category number 5 is the enemy's big air targets or planes or helicopters as well here. I'm going to put helicopters. Category number 6 is to figure out how to cross the river even more. And category number 7 is logistics. How to make sure that whatever crosses the river gets the supplies they need on a constant basis. These challenges are going to be increasing as the area of operations of Ukrainians are growing. But right now, let's start with the first one. The troops, Ukraine more or less have found certain answers. They are using their artillery advantage, and they are able to destroy enemy troops whenever they're trying to approach, and specifically cluster munitions are helping a lot. They are destroying whenever enemy is trying to move here, they are trying to destroy that enemy. Moreover, Russians have been underappreciating this direction, and they have been dedicating forces to other direction. However, this does not fully solve this problem, and the number of troops still is going to be dependent to overcome, with Ukraine acquiring more and more manpower of the left bank of Dnipro River. The enemy armor, Ukraine has found a solution and they are adapting to it already. Right now, Russian enemy armor from this area has been squeezed very, very heavily. And this can give Ukraine an advantage, because what Ukraine is doing, they're utilizing a lot of kamikaze drones, the FPV drones. Right now, Russians are reporting that Ukrainians are flying in basically swarms of these drones, and they're destroying everything, and they cannot almost move in this area. So it seems that Ukraine found certain tactic to deal with number 2, at least at this stage. Number 3, artillery. This is very, very important, and this is going to be crucial when we're going to discuss the next step. And with artillery, here Ukraine is right now winning mostly because their artillery has better capabilities with their anti-artillery radars, like counter-battery radars. So overall, we can say that Ukrainian artillery has an advantage in the area. Enemy drones. This has been a big problem, and this has been something that's been underlined, that while artillery artillery warfare can be won by Ukrainians because of the Western style counter-battery radars, drone technology, on the other hand, is not. However, already right now we had visual proofs, and it's public information, that Ukrainians are using certain new tools of electronic warfare systems to even capture and sometimes completely take off the FPV drones from the Russians. I cannot confirm that it is yet to scale to completely overcome Russians, but there is definitely certain work that is happening to make sure that enemy drone threat is being dealt with. Planes and helicopters. This is a major problem for Ukrainians because the aerial glide bombs and the helicopters are going to be an issue. With helicopters, right now, what Ukraine has been able to do is to push them back a little bit So this part is less of a threat right now. The planes, on the other hand, so far are still a problem. To do that, Ukraine will need to figure out and take risks and try to get certain level of anti-air systems into dangerous zones along the shorelines. If Ukraine gets artillery too close to the river, not the artillery, but the anti-air systems too close to the river to make sure the troops are protected, then enemy artillery will try to target these anti-air systems and destroy them. That's why it is crucial that the anti-artillery and anti-drone parts are very much ironed out before the planes can be taken out completely by installing anti-air systems. Ukraine doesn't have enough anti-air systems to cover whole Ukraine. True, but they have some certain options, very powerful options, modern ones, for anti-air systems that they can deploy specifically for this direction if they will need to execute on this operation. So all in all, right now planes are planned, but I think planes are dependent on whether or not Ukraine will be able to completely suppress the enemy artillery, that it cannot move, and that they are able to find a solid counter to drones. With regards to crossing, this was, as I said, the big problems. However, with what we saw, generally speaking, Ukraine can get troops across Dnipro, and we know that there are certain extra things that I cannot tell you about because Russians still haven't shown this. So overall, I would say that crossing is more or less secured. Logistics, on the other hand, that is still a little bit I'm completely unsure. Right now, there is about 500 men that are on the shoreline. If they will continue feeding more and more troops, at some point they will need to set up logistics that they're going to be often enough, so it's going to start becoming very, very much relevant for Russians to monitor river 24/7 at certain places. So right now, logistics is still a big question, and it's going to again depend on how much Ukraine will be able to take care of artillery, drones, and planes threat. Next good question would be, how do we know that Ukrainians are advancing in their plans? Well, the first one is pretty obvious. We're going to see we get more and more reports of Ukrainians getting ground control of this. And second, we need to look how Ukraine is going to start dealing with the aerial threats. Those are the big problems for Ukraine. So two reports that we should be on the lookout for. A, Ukrainians deploying more anti-air systems. Most probably Russians are going to start crying about this, that they cannot fly their drones or something like this. And right now we heard some messages, but this needs to become like on a constant basis something that we receive. And second thing that we need to be on the lookout for is of Russian planes being shot down in the area of southern Kherson or around northern Crimea. That means that Ukrainians have brought certain level of high value long range artillery to the anti-air systems to the front lines. That would suggest that they are able to dominate Russian artillery in the area, which is right now not completely the case. Ukrainian troops are still reporting that they are experiencing certain problems with Russian artillery on the ground. Beyond that, with regards to enemy armor, right now Ukrainians have achieved significant progress with the enemy armor. A lot of enemy armored vehicles have been moved away from this direction, and they are trying to keep only the bare minimum out there because FPV drones are completely brutal. And we know that Russians are preparing certain units of formed units of the enemy armor around the northern Crimea part. What I think that these units are there for, they are hoping to be as a backup in case of Ukrainians establishing certain outposts over here, and then they can engage these units and try to kick Ukrainians out of this bigger bridgehead. I don't expect them to use armor while the bridgehead is relatively small for now. Then with regards to troops, we already know what's Russian plan because we've heard that right now there is a new general that is commanding, General Teplinsky, that is commanding the southern front line. And Teplinsky is a VDV general. So what he was looking at is trying to get certain units to help come reinforce. Russia has been on the political dedication with their offensive efforts. And a lot of the Russian offensive troops are tied up in the east where they're trying to commit to offensive. That is why the southern direction over here is understaffed. General Teplinsky, he is more of a VDV general, so he knows how to work and he has respect from the VDV forces. So what we know is that that general is trying to get VDV units from the area of Robotina, more precisely from around Verbove, to get them to the front lines. The issue with that is a unit that has been in combat, a unit that is very closely tied in the actual participation. Whenever it's pulled back, it needs either some time to recoup their strength and or it's going to be very significantly underpowered. For Russia, it seems that so far the units that they're getting from Verbove are being sent to reinforce these directions right now. What I want you very important to underline here is that while right now Russia doesn't have a dedicated reserve force that can come in and save this direction, and Ukraine can expect to make certain progress, mostly this is based on the fact that Russia is so goddamn focused on the attacks in the east. If today there will be a political decision saying no more east attacks, we're not doing that anymore, now there's going to be units from this area that couldn't be pulled, even with less dedication, even with less combat power, they will still be able to reinforce this area and they will still be able to stop Ukrainian advances, at least with the forces that are being utilized right now by the Ukrainian armed forces. And it's not completely clear whether more dedicated forces of Ukrainians in the area would speed up this process or not. Finally, to understand at what point Ukraine will dedicate themselves to this campaign completely, because right now it's mostly probing attacks. Right now it's the troops that, while they are professionals, they're mostly Marines, and they're using vehicles that are suited for maritime operations. And while I did say that not all of the APCs and infantry fighting vehicles can swim over Dnipro, in extreme cases, it's still a possibility. So I believe Ukrainians are still holding back on full commitment. Commitment will come in at those moments when we're going to start seeing Ukraine utilizing tanks in the area. So when we see that Ukrainians are going to be throwing in tanks on this front line, crossing the river, and most importantly, artillery pieces crossing the river. That is going to be crucial, because for Ukraine to set up major engineering positions, for example, restoring crossing around Antonovsky Bridge, setting up long-term pontoon bridges like massive formations and so on, Ukraine will need to bring their artillery closer to the enemy positions whenever they capture certain bridgehead, you might say. And at that moment we can say, so once the artillery pieces are spotted on the left bank of Kherson, at that moment there is commitment from Ukrainians that is going to be ongoing. They will be trying to push Russian artillery further and further from river so they can set up engineering positions, so then they can set up the logistics. That is the last question on how they can overcome these challenges. I hope this overview helped you understand a little bit better the challenges that Ukrainians are trying to overcome. And I want to close out today by saying thanks to everyone that participated in a drone fundraiser. We had to bump that target to 23,000 because it was the fastest fundraiser we gotten in this channel's history. If you have something to chip in, do it, because we're getting, instead of normal drones, thermal imaging drones, which are like 3 to 5 times better than a normal one. all for the defenders of Avdiivka. Slava Ukraini, I love you guys, and I'll see you next time.